All right. Good evening. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the officially one of the last presentations of the day. So thanks for hanging in there for 2 days of lots of information being disseminated. So you got to keep your brains open for a little bit longer so we could talk about the role of the Epic owner. So the reason I'm doing this presentation, when I think about some of the things I've done in the past to help organizations and clients expand their use of the Scaled Agile framework, this is always one of those areas that generates a lot of questions. People are like, what are Epic owners? Where do they come from? How is this supposed to work? So my presentation today is to share some learnings, from the field. But first we'll get started with, the book definition of what an Epic owner is supposed to be. So in case you don't know me, my name is Charlene Cuenca. I'm a SAFE Fellow, Principal Consultant, SPCT, and SAFE Contributor. I work with ICON Agility Services, and I welcome all of you today to my presentation. So what are we going to cover today? So we'll talk about, the role of the Epic owner, how it's defined, like who they are, talk about what they enable, and where they come from. And then we'll also get into, a quick overview of how Epic owners are supposed to unify strategic intent, right? Because that's the title of this presentation, is Epic Owners, the Key to Strategic Unification. So what do we mean by that? And how do they do that by, coordinating throughout the organizational hierarchy? We'll also talk about, Epic owners as the shepherds of the portfolio Kanban. We'll cover off, how they enable portfolio flow by being that shepherd for the Kanban. And we'll talk a bit about that flow-based process in the portfolio Kanban system, as well as, the lean startup cycle and how they enable the evaluation of minimal viable products. Finally, we'll conclude with talking about how to spot some anti-patterns, because I've seen quite a few in the field, and also talk about some success patterns. And once we're done with that overview, then, we'll open it up to whatever questions you guys might have. All right? So let's first talk about unification. When we talk about unification, you see the definition here. When you bring together unlike elements, you unify them. Political movements can unify people by inspiring them to work towards a shared goal, right? I frequently walk into organizations and I try to just assess what's going on. And usually I start with the executives and senior leaders to see what kind of problems they're having. Sometimes I'll go talk with the chief technology officer, or I'll go talk with the chief product officer to identify what they think the strategy is. But no matter who I ask, I always get a different answer. And it creates a lot of confusion if you understand the downstream impacts of not having clarity on priorities. So we want to leverage the role of this Epic owner to be that unifier, to be the tie that binds and start to work across the functions. Because if this chief product officer thinks the priorities are this, and the chief technology officer thinks that the priorities are this, we're not really working together, and we're very siloed in our thinking. So we want to leverage this role, often misunderstood role, to help us be that unifier of really what are we managing here? What are the different strategic initiatives? What are their priorities, so that we all are engaged across the functions? So let's talk about the role of the Epic owner. What do we mean by this? When you take a look at the big picture, you can clearly see they're a first-class citizen. They play in the portfolio space. We have to keep in mind that Epic owners are a role and not a title, right? Because when we start to think about all the different strategic initiatives in a given portfolio, they might cross over lots of different areas. They might be very business-facing in terms of trying to deliver on business priorities. They might be things that product is trying to move forward with, maybe some innovation and those types of activities. It might be more technology facing, where we're doing a lot of enabler work and we have a runway of things that we need to do. Or it might be related to regulatory and compliance type items. All of those things would feed into the backlog, but how do we take all of those together and prioritize them under one portfolio backlog? Because these different strategic initiatives can come from different areas, that's why we want to refer to the Epic owner as more of a role and not a title. You don't want to just say that it comes from, hey, it's a project manager, it's a program manager. It's just going to depend on what it is that you're trying to drive forward with in terms of strategy, right? If we start looking at things like more technology-facing things, that might be an IT leader, it might be an IT SME, it might be an architect, right? And they don't necessarily come from the PMO, or they don't come from product. So that's an it depends answer. The other key thing that they do to help kind of unify the strategy is basically being the shepherds of that portfolio Kanban, right? When you take a look at the portfolio Kanban here, this role is the one that's really driving those forward and making sure that we stay unified in terms of our understanding of those strategic initiatives that we call epics, right? So they are those shepherds. And being an epic owner means, when you think of strategic initiatives, they're very big in scope and scale. There isn't a single person that will know all the facets about that strategic initiative, from the subject matter expertise of the business, to the different products that are involved, to the different technology that's being used. All of those things, imply that we have to coordinate across other areas to really have that conjoined understanding of the strategy we're trying to deliver, right? And that's no easy task, right? So as the shepherd, they're the ones that are bringing those folks together at the right time. So they're the unifier of value, right? They're going to need to bring those people into a discussion, whether it's an epic refinement or any other type of workshop, so that we have the right people in the room to really define those epics well, and that we have clarity on what those priorities are. So with that being said, the framework has always been about principles and values. And the role of the epic owner can clearly be tied to some of the SAFE principles. Some of the things that they're doing, are enabled by these principles, or they enable these SAFE principles, like taking an economic view. When we start to take a look a little bit deeper into the Portfolio Kanban system in a later slide, there's a lot of decisions that are being made there. And we know when we look at that SAFE principle around the economic view, we're always trading off against, how long is this going to take? What's the cycle time? What's the development expense? What's the product cost? What's the value we're going to get? What's the risk if we do it or don't do it? All of those things are, in play, and they have to be balanced out. And we can't do that with just one person. It's going to involve talking with multiple functions so that, we can understand what those trade-offs are versus other things that we could have in our backlog, or things that we haven't implementing that we can continue working on. So by working through these different functions, we are applying systems thinking, right? We're not just optimizing for the business because that's what the business wants and therefore that's the priority. We're optimizing, we know that value flows across the silos. It flows across the functions. So that means that unless we engage with the right people, we may create a bottleneck. We may create rework downstream when somebody, disagrees that really is the priority and that's the focus and the value that we're going to get. So applying systems thinking here is, within that role is what they're helping with. And by managing and being the shepherd of the Portfolio Kanban, they help enable the ability to limit WIP, right? Most companies I go and work with, when I start to do my analysis and identify what's the current state, they've got lots of stuff in flight. And a lot of times there's a lot of invisible work in flight as well, because the functions aren't talking to each other. And by enabling this flow-based Kanban system, the Portfolio Kanban, they help make sure that we can see everything, right? We see everything, regardless of what functional area it might have generated from originally. We put WIP limits in there, so we focus on finishing things that are valuable as opposed to starting everything that we think is valuable, right? So by reducing those batch sizes and focusing on the highest priorities, then we can get things through the system. So this is enabled by that role, getting the folks to talk to each other. And then, of course, we always want to organize around value, right? These strategic initiatives generate value for us, and it's our epic owner that we rely to make sure that the focus of value and in the way that we define these epics is always there and is very clear. So unifying strategic intent. Let's talk a bit more about that, right? We're talking about unification. We're talking about making sure folks are on the same page. And we also talk about the epic owner being a role and not a title, right? So if we've got more business-facing strategic initiatives that we're trying to move forward with, that's fine. We have an epic owner as the owner of a business epic, and that epic owner can come from different parts of the organizational hierarchy. So when we say the epic owner is a role and not a title, we're really referring to the dual operating system of business agility, right? We don't necessarily say all the epic owners come from this org structure and that's the only source that they can come from. It just depends on the area. For instance, if you have something that's more technology facing, maybe it's a major technology transformation that we're trying to do to enable us to get to market faster, the person that's probably going to know the most about that probably is going to come from your IT or engineering organization, or even architecture. So in that sense, we can have epic owners from different parts of the organization, and that's what you see here. But when we talk about unification again, there's unification both kind of vertically, because we have Epic owners that are working within the portfolio space primarily. They're working with the portfolio leadership team, making sure that they're aligned on what needs to be done. But that's not all. We also are, looking vertically and horizontally. So in the portfolio space, they're getting the functions to work well together by working across product, delivery, business, IT, any of the other functions that are part of the end-to-end value delivery. But then as we go through, defining things that our arts are going to have to execute upon that are going to be delivered as part of this epic, that's working with the program teams of each of the arts, right? That would be product management or solution management if you have solution trains, as well as coordinating with the release train engineer, right? Once we define these well, they're eventually going to get started, right? They're going to go into execution and implementation. And that coordination with the release train engineer can ensure that we know how the epic is progressing, what kind of value we're getting from the epic, and if there's any roadblocks that we need to be aware of as an epic owner. And sometimes we need to go even deeper into that kind of vertical alignment by working with the teams on things that they might have to create to support the delivery of the epic. They might have to do some exploration in some early PIs. They might need some clarity. So you can see here, it's, because epics are big in scope and scale, there is that connection both horizontally and vertically with lots of different roles, because the epic owner is not going to deliver this themselves, nor can they define the value all by themselves. So the front half of this process, working with the portfolio leaders and working with, product and folks like that, there means that they're driving the definition of the epic. But then as we go into implementation, they're going to work closely with the product management and release train engineers of these arts to be able to stay in close connection of what's happening and what kind of progress we're making. So in that sense, when you think about all of those roles, right, I've talked about the portfolio space, the roles within the art, and even in some cases, some of the agile teams, as well as the different functions, they are the unifiers of those roles across the organizational hierarchy, regardless of where they come from. Let's dive a bit deeper into the Portfolio Kanban system, because we say that the epic owner is the shepherd of the Portfolio Kanban system, right? So this is your typical Portfolio Kanban system, where we have a funnel, we review, we analyze, eventually it makes it to the portfolio backlog, and then we end up going into implementation, right? And eventually we'll call it done. But the important piece here in the early days to get that alignment, with the executives, with the leadership, with the rest of the portfolio roles, is in the left half of this Kanban system, right? There's lots of ideas, lots of things we could be working on in the funnel, but we can't start it all. So once we determine that we want to get started with something, then we can move the epic into the reviewing state, right? And what we're really trying to do here is make sure that we're aligned on what are we trying to do with this epic? What strategy is it trying to move forward? What is the business outcome we're trying to achieve? So reviewing is all about defining the what. We haven't approved it yet. It's all about defining the what. And the epic owner might facilitate an epic refinement. They might do an epic workshop to try to make sure that folks understand what we're trying to do, and they co-create it. This is not the epic owner working in a closet, defining it all by themselves and saying, here it is, do you guys agree or not agree? They're gonna refine it, just like you should, and by engaging architecture, product, business, IT or engineering. All of those groups contribute to what goes into this epic. Once we are able to pull this into analyzing, remember, we're not pushing this through here. These are all WIP limited states. We take a look at defining this at another level, right? If we see that this epic is showing a lot of potential, it shows a lot of benefit because we've whiz-jiffed it, we take it into the analyzing state. And now we have to define it further, right? We're trying to get it approved. And what we do here is, now that we have a basic definition using the epic hypothesis statement, we'll want to fill out the lean business case to provide even more detail. Like, who needs to be involved? How many arts are we talking about? What's the minimal viable product? How can we incrementally get this value? Who are the groups that need to be involved even outside of our arts? But the thing about epics that's different from the kind of project mindset as we think of moving from projects to product is basically that we're trying to define the epic as an experiment. That's why we use minimal viable products, right? We think we're going to get this benefit. It sounds great. It might make us a lot of money. That's our hypothesis. So we use that kind of lean startup cycle to help prove or disprove that that's actually going to happen. That's why you see define MVP here as an exit criteria, right? We don't want to just start it and say, hey, we defined it well, we're going to do everything, and then we'll get the value. We have to prove it. So we always want to think of epics as experiments of what value is that we think we're going to get, and when we're going to implement the features for that MVP to try to prove it out or disprove it, right? That's what the lean startup cycle is all about. So once we define the features that go with the MVP, we might define some additional potential features if it proves itself so we can keep going. But all of that type of information goes in the lean business case. So it's important to, once again, co-create this with those other functional groups so you have alignment, and make sure you always have technology representation so that the amount of effort or the amount of complexity, all of those things is taken into account as you define this. So to get out of the analyzing state, of course, you're going to have to get it approved. And that's just an approval to start. Remember, this is an experiment. So an approval to start with the MVP features and then prove it out over time so that we're not wasting time waiting to get to the end of the epic before we see if we got the benefit or not. So presuming it gets a go decision, now it's on the portfolio backlog. Now those epics are there, and they're in the order in which the WSDIF results say the priorities lie based on that WSDIF score. And that's the trigger to the downstream arts that we identified that are going to take part in the value delivery. That's the trigger to them that they can now start to pull that into their own program Kanban flow-based process to get features ready for upcoming PIs. They can now start doing that based on how the priorities sit in the portfolio backlog and based on their own capacity to do that. So that's the trigger. Now, once those epics or the features underneath the epic, starting with the MVP, start to go through PI planning and the teams on the arts have identified that they have the capacity to do the work and start proving out some of the hypotheses in the MVP, then the epic is going to go into implementing. And you see again the MVP state where we're just trying to evaluate this experiment to see if does it look like now that we've done the MVP in this PI, does it look like we're going to get the value? If so, then we're going to continue on. We're going to persevere. We're going to continue on with the additional potential features. But that cycle will replicate itself. We're going to do continuous evaluation, continue to view these as small experiments of value. And that cycle means we're going to evaluate this very often to identify if we should keep working on it or not, because as we know, there's an infinite backlog of work and value delivery. And if this isn't looking like it's valuable anymore, we have the ability to pivot away from it and pull in the next highest epic priority and start on that. So everything here is very value oriented. And you don't have to finish all of the epic to be able to say that it was completed, right? It's a trade-off in that kind of economic framework mindset to where there's other things we could work on. If we've got most of the value of this epic and we're only 50% done, there's other stuff on there that are higher value for what's remaining, we could trade off, and that's okay. But the key here is that the epic owner is the one, as the shepherd, they help unify all that information, provide that information to the folks that can make the decisions, our stakeholders, our customers even, and allow those decisions to be made so that we don't think that we have to get all of the epic done to actually call it done. But front half of this, once again, is the definition and the value definition that we're trying to accomplish, and then the implementing and done is really evaluating those results and working closely with the arts as they're delivering the features under this epic to paint the picture of the epic. So that's a lot of work, right? So an epic owner is not a pencil pusher, a document writer or anything like that. They're the ones that have to kind of herd cats. They're the ones that have to bring people in there and make a decision on what should go into some of these artifacts so that it can be communicated outwardly and provide a lot of clarity to anyone who wants to understand why we're working on something. So as we look at, the epic owner, we know that they're really key to the portfolio Kanban process, right? And they are the key folks that are going to run that flow-based Kanban system. But when do we start thinking about epic owners? Do we have to have epic owners before we launch an art? Like, when's the right time? When you look at the implementation roadmap, we can see a lot of the preparation activities as we get started with our business agility journey and our transformation efforts. And of course, once we get past the tipping point, we want to make sure our leadership is trained. So we might do some leading safe classes. We might do some safe executive workshops to make sure folks know more about safe other than how to just spell it. Right? So that's always at the beginning, and we make sure we've got our change agents and a Lean Agile Center of Excellence that can help us. But one of the things to note here is that, and this was an ad, and this got added later on. The original roadmap did not have lean portfolio management this early, but I've come to find out in my own experience that it's very important to try to plant the seeds of lean portfolio management early on. And you can do that even if you're still working in projects, right? In one of my transformations, I was helping them get started with SAFE. And one of the things you see here right next to the lean portfolio management purple box is that first leading SAFE class where I'm training some executives in there. I've got some vice presidents, I've got some directors across different functions. I usually, before that class, I'll canvas like, what are our priorities today? Like, what are the different big strategic initiatives that organization is, having today? And who are the folks that are actually working in that space? There's probably somebody already, even though they're not an official Epic owner, they're probably doing Epic owner-like things, like trying to have those conversations, trying to define the strategy, trying to look at progress and value delivery. And once I start to see those people, I want to pull them into the first leading SAFE class that I run. Because that way they'll have some information of what's yet to come. And what I've found is that actually creates a pull event. Like if you teach leading SAFE well, so they understand the holistic system and how this could work, even though you might not be there yet, it creates a lot of interest with them to where you can actually start to introduce some of these artifacts early and start to go down that path, even though we're not ready for full-blown LPM yet. So that is one way you can get started with LPM early. In another organization that I helped, very big organization, I had already helped another kind of larger portfolio go through a SAFE journey, and they were very successful at it. And this other portfolio heard about it, and they wanted to kind of start thinking about how they could get started with this. And even though they were still in project mode, right? What I did was I ended up taking a look at what current projects they had in flight, how they could be affinitized, like what strategic areas. You can usually start to see affinitization of projects, like these 5 are kind of around this strategy, these other 6 are around this. Once you start to do that, it becomes very helpful and beneficial to make it transparent, because some of the things that group, the portfolio leadership team of that group was telling me was they can't see anything. They're like, hey, we've got all this stuff in work, everyone's super busy, but we started on this thing like 6 months ago and I have no idea when it's gonna finish. And by doing this analysis, I came up with this idea to work with that kind of potential future Epic owner, the ones that's already working in that portfolio space across these different initiatives, to take a look at categorizing those, and then bringing the leaders in that portfolio across technology, operations, across product, across the business, and across delivery. And having that Epic owner, that future potential Epic owner helping me with this, we just got all those people in the same room. It was a quick 1-hour session, but we had already done this other analysis before that. And I used the Kanban states that I just went over, right? I put what was already in implementing, what are the things queued up on the backlog, what are things we're gonna wanna start at some point in the future. And by kind of just listing them that way and bringing that group together, we started to have the really frank conversation, because it was very eye-opening. A lot of folks were like, I had no idea that we were working on this. What is this technology thing over here? Who prioritized that? Like, why are we even working on that? I don't see that as valuable. So it started this really good conversation. And this can almost be thought of as like an early version of a portfolio sync, right? Because that's what we were doing. We were looking at all the different things that they could work on, what's already in flight. And it just generated a lot of positive conversation. And of course, my litmus test whenever I try things like these, experiments with different companies, is this a valuable conversation for you to have? Do you want to have another one of these? Should it be weekly? And that kind of thing. And they were like, absolutely, Charlene. You see all the people that are in a room right now? We never talk to each other. This is the first time we've talked with each other, and half of us didn't even know that a lot of these things were being worked on. So we have more conversations to have. So it was very powerful. That's another example of how you can start some of that thinking early, even though you might not even have your arts yet, but getting those concepts down early on is only going to help you. In one more example I'll give you, another organization I work with, they had gone through a successful transformation. I was the lead of that, and we had an end of the year, after 1 year, we had an end of the year review with the executives. We were kind of doing a retrospective on the transformation. And one of the feedback items from one of the C-level executives was, what's one thing you could change about this if we could do this over? And he said, absolutely hands down, I would want to start with LPM practices sooner. Like the role of the Epic owner, like how we've pivoted, like our senior program managers, how we've pivoted architecture to kind of support that model. If we would have started doing that sooner, we would have been able to kind of get more value faster. So there's a few examples there, but in the end, this is, that Epic owner role is the focal point to kind of help you on that, to plant the seeds. But first you have to train them, and they have to understand where we could go, right? So you see starting the shift in the bottom right here, that by doing those things, you can start to look at what's in progress. You can even use the Kanban, even though you're not kind of in that full framework yet, and getting the portfolio team to align on what's in flight, giving them that visibility is very powerful. So that starts that mindset shift, right? Start thinking about experiments, start thinking about value, not just executing projects very early in the journey. Let's talk about some anti-patterns, right? I've seen quite a few. When you think about your own organization and how you want to implement the role of the Epic owner, we sometimes see epics as projects. Like I've seen that before. It's like, what are epics, Charlene? Epics encapsulate value delivery, right? They start the daisy chain of events to where we can incrementally deliver value. They're experiments. Epics are not projects, right? We don't want to call epics projects. Like I said, in that kind of affinitization that I did, we had like groups of projects that might be a strategic initiative by itself, right? So that would be an epic, but you have to define it as a value-oriented backlog item. The other anti-pattern I've seen too is, especially organizations that have a large PMO, is that, hey, why don't we just pivot our project and program managers and they'll be epic owners, and then that's gonna propagate the first bullet, where you're gonna have them just kind of manage projects as epics, and that's not what we wanna do. So we don't wanna run epics like a project. We wanna run them as experiments, but we need the right fit for purpose. So we want somebody that has, good relationships, somebody that can, that understands that strategic initiative area, that can use those relationships that they built to have those refinements and call people into these sessions so that they can stay aligned together. So it's not a one-to-one. Remember the dual operating system of business agility. The Epic owner can come from any part of the organization. It does depend on who's the best fit, who has the knowledge, who has the relationships, who's already doing some of this today. And then one of the ones I've seen too, this is usually when I walk into a company as opposed to when I help them get started, is the portfolio backlog starts to resemble a work breakdown structure. If we define epics well, we know that they are experiments, they have a hypothesis, and we're trying to start the daisy chain of events for incremental value delivery, right? We work from an enterprise backlog structure. It starts with strategic themes. Those things have value, right? We define objectives and key results for strategic themes. And then as we go through the enterprise backlog structure, what we start to encapsulate those strategic initiatives that are part of those strategic themes as epics, right? That's what the epic owner helps us do. The epic has a hypothesis. That hypothesis has some kind of value orientation associated with it that probably ties to a specific OKR. But we can't just deliver an epic by itself. We have to break that down into features. And features also have a benefit hypothesis itself. It's a subset of the outcome hypothesis of the epic. So those should connect. Once we take the features through PI planning, the teams are going to break the feature down into stories. And then the stories also are written in such a way that they have a subset of value for that vertical slice in that story, for that sprint or iteration that ties to the benefit of the feature. If we don't look at the backlog that way today, we probably should take a close look at that, because everything about epics, daisy chaining, the start of incremental value delivery is what we're trying to go for, right? Incremental value delivery, test a hypothesis. Are we still getting value? If not, we should think about pivoting. But never is, even the enterprise backlog structure is never meant to be a work breakdown structure. That is an anti-pattern. Clearly define your value. And I've said this a few times already, but epic owners are only allowed to come from one functional area. Remember fit for purpose. Who already has the relationships? Who's already doing some of this stuff today? Who's already shepherding? Those are probably the right people. And maybe this strategic initiative area, maybe it's a specific value stream, has a different set of people that do that versus another value stream. So, really think about the right people to fill this role as opposed to a functional part of your organization that should just, it automatically come from. That's an anti-pattern. All right. So there's your caution signs. If you start to see that, don't do that. All right. Who are they and what do they enable? What do they enable? So talk real quickly about success factors. Remember, we get to get started with lean portfolio management practices early on, like the examples I showed you in a previous slide. And we have to think of LPM as a transition over time. Those epic owners are key to unify the functions, to stay aligned on the different strategy we're trying to move forward with. And if we start to plant the seeds early, you're only setting up yourself for success when it's really time to kind of expand your lean portfolio management implementation. So go through value stream and art identification, create your plan, launch some arts. Eventually, you're going to have critical mass in your portfolio. That's when it makes the most sense to have a lot of deep focus in the lean portfolio management space to implement those competencies within there, or those capabilities within LPM. Remember, identify those potential epic owners early, right? Find out who's already doing some of that stuff today, and start to give them some initial understanding of what SAFE is. So we bring them on the journey early on, like I talked about with pulling them into a leading SAFE class. If you teach that well, they're going to pull in and try to say, hey, how can I start using some of these artifacts? That looks really beneficial. That lean business case is only 5 pages, and my current business case is 100 pages. I'd rather write the 5-page one. Include them in training, like I just said before, and then start using some of the lean business cases. You'd be amazed at how much, once people are educated on what's in these type of artifacts, how much they like it better than what they're using right now. So once again, understand it's a transition over time, but for sure try to plant those seeds very early on to prepare what's going to come in the future. All right, in summary, remember that epics are large in scope and scale, right? They require a lot of coordination. It's not something that a single person can do, so they're really just a unifier. They're the ones that are bringing the people together and keeping them aligned. They're that key role that unifies those functions around the strategy, because we always want to organize around value. Remember, we can leverage those LPM concepts early on using that epic owner or potential future epic owners, as I like to call them, as kind of the bridge to get there, right? To aid in that transition by planting those seeds early. And of course, avoid those anti-patterns. Always stay organized around value. And by avoiding some of the ones that I just mentioned earlier, the epic owner can truly be your key to strategic unification. So that's the end of my presentation, but I'd like to take some questions. I think we still have like almost 7 minutes. It's like 6.5 now. But if we have any questions.
We've got a few questions in the app, so I'll read the ones with the top votes. First one is there ever a case for a full-time epic owner? For example, if you need to localize new products into multiple markets and the epic owner manages the localization process into all markets.
Yeah, I would say whoever is fulfilling the epic owner role, that generally is a full-time role, right? If we start to look at, what I was saying earlier about affinitization of strategic areas, that might be a couple of epics. Remember that we're WIP limiting our epics. We're not trying to just start everything. But in that example that was in the app, I would consider that full-time. Any epic owner that you have would be a full-time role, with the exception of if we're in the early part of that implementation roadmap and we're just getting started with that, that's not a full-time role yet, right? We haven't implemented full-blown lean portfolio management, but once we get closer and closer to that, you're going to want to have them as full-time roles because they're pivoting the way they were working before to a new way of working, and that requires a lot of lean in and heavy lifting. So short answer is yes, they should be full-time, but maybe not in the very beginning.
So do epic owners, do they have to be a business or IT professional? And also, does every epic need an epic owner?
So I think I covered this earlier with the dual operating system of business agility, but we don't always just say that the epic owner is going to come from one specific functional area. So could be business, it could be IT. If you have, sometimes organizations have a separate architecture organization that's under the CTO or CIO, and it could come from that organization. So it will depend on the strategic initiative area as far as that goes. And then, whenever you have those folks that are performing that role, once again, like I said, it should be full-time dedicated role. Does that answer the question?
Hope so.
If it doesn't, whoever asked that question, please like speak up. I mean, happy to have a conversation. Okay.
Great. What lower tier role would the Epic owner be like? RTE/Scrum Master or PM/PO or neither?
Yeah, like I said, it's kind of, I know I gave kind of a nebulous answer with the it depends, right? But it really does depend. RTEs maybe fairly close. I mean, a lot of organizations I've worked with that have like a large PMO or a heavy PMO, a lot of the folks that perform the Epic owner role, especially for business epics, it might be a senior program manager is typically what I see in that role, right? But it could be an architect too. It could be a solutions architect. It could be an enterprise architect. So it just depends on what the strategic initiative area is. But product owners, product managers, I see that as a bit of a separate function. I don't like to overload roles. Like I wouldn't want to have a product owner be a product owner, a product manager, and Epic owner, right? You're overloading the roles.
I think that kind of answers the next question, which would be, would it make sense in most situations that Epic owners would be project managers if the organization had an agile PMO?
Not necessarily, but in some cases, especially if they're really close to that product area, like some product managers, especially, if you have a big organization and you have like a senior product manager or product manager, you have like a hierarchy within the product org. Sometimes that more senior product leader, maybe an Epic owner, that would be another source. But it's like I said, going to depend on the strategic initiative area. Sometimes a business owner, if you guys are familiar with the role of the business owner, they might actually be an Epic owner as well. But a lot of times, you can read the SAFE article around Epic owners and they'll mention business owners, but I personally don't like that model because business owners are very busy. Those are usually heads of the business or someone very senior in the business, and they don't have enough time to be able to set up an Epic refinement and go chase down all the different people that need to take part and go work with the RTE to look at the progress of the Epic. So even though you can, it's my opinion that maybe that's not always the best scenario because of time constraints. And as we said before, I recommend Epic owners should be more full time. But if you have that pattern where you have your business owner, they're likely going to need a helper. I've seen that. When I allow that to happen, like in organizations, usually they're going to need someone to partner with them to kind of help them do the heavy lifting that an Epic owner does.
So we have just under 2 minutes left, and we have several questions, but if we don't get to your question in this session, they'll be answered after this. So last question, what is your recommendation of the duration of an epic? 1 to 3 PIs or no upper limit? Do you consider run epic as epic so team art can group their work for reporting or capacity allocation purposes?
That's a long question.
Yeah. First part is, what is your recommendation of the duration of an epic?
Yeah, so I don't favor what I call runaway epics, just like we don't want runaway projects that just kind of keep going. We keep adding scope and cost is skyrocketing and all that. My general rule of thumb that I coach, because epic by definition is it's big in scope and scale, so that means it's automatically bigger than a PI. If it's something you could do in a PI, it's a feature or a capability if you have a solution train. But for epics, I normally recommend that it's anywhere from like 2 to 5 PIs. I try to stay around a year, because it makes it easier to quantify the value of the epic, and it also makes it easier to see if you're making progress. If you have an epic that's taking a year or two, I think that's too big. I think it should be sliced thinner.
Well, we only have 30 seconds left. Did you want to try and?
Yeah, what was the last part of it?
The last part of that was just, do you consider run epic as epic so team/art can group their work for reporting or capacity allocation purposes?
No, I think I touched on this. So just kind of going back to textbook SAFE, right? We have different types of epics. You have a portfolio epic, you have a program epic. If you have a solution train, you have a solution train scoped epic. But there are some epics that the art can deliver by itself. When we talk about a portfolio epic, we can manage it through the Portfolio Kanban, but we know it's going to go to one art. But frequently, there's going to be multiple arts involved, or multiple groups, even outside the primary art that's probably going to be working on this. The second thing I want to mention is that I talked earlier about making sure we're connecting it to value, right? Not work. So making sure that we think about incremental value delivery, not just this team needs to do this work, that train needs to do this work, and then we'll get our value. Think about it as connecting incremental value delivery, and the Epic is the thing that can house it, right? So that the rolling up of the information, we could see progress across all the different groups that have to take part in that. And the Epic owner is the one is the tie that binds. They're the ones that are making it very easy to consume, to know where we're at, the priorities, and if we're getting the value. So we're out of time, but if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to take them either here or outside. So thanks for joining, guys.